Hello, and welcome to this episode of Inside Legal ESG. My name is Pam Cohn, and I'm honored to be the host for this podcast series. Today, we are especially honored to have with us Dan McMahon, the managing partner for Integrated Growth Advisors. And his LinkedIn profile says he is an advisory professional focused on developing highly valuable businesses. So we will learn more about that during today's conversations. Welcome, Dan.
Pam, thank you very much for having me. It's absolutely my pleasure to be here.
I want to start out by having you describe for us what Integrated Growth Advisory Services does, how the company formed, and what role you play as managing partner.
I appreciate that. Integrated Growth Advisors is a value creation firm. We're an advisory firm to business owners. We spend our time working with professional services firms as well as other types of business owner operated entities. We're a value creation firm in that when we work with a client, we're trying to get their equity value, their ownership value of the company, the valuation of the business to be higher. And we do that by focusing on structure, process, ultimately trying to build a sustainable and transferable business for the business owner. And what that means is the business processes, the business revenue streams, the function of the business is sustainable into the future, but it's also transferable to other future employees or future stakeholders or owners. So our view is a sustainable and transferable business is a more valuable business. And through the process of founding Integrated Growth Advisors, which I did 12 years ago, at that point in time, I was a partner in a CPA firm, and I did a lot of advisory work around internal controls and corporate governance. And a lot of my work was focused on starting with a whiteboard, just a blank whiteboard or a blank sheet of paper. And from that, trying to determine what it was we were trying to accomplish in terms of an internal control structure, which ties very much into corporate governance. So in that process, I got very, very good at starting with a blank sheet of paper and helping my clients envision what can be and what should be in terms of objectives. So we tie all of that together with our clients today in terms of helping them envision what their business could be, approaching it from structure and process, building a sustainable and transferable business. And corporate governance, as you can imagine, is very much at the core of that structure and process. So kind of a long-winded answer, but I hope that maybe spells it out for you.
It absolutely does. And it leads right into my next question, because you and I originally met because you wrote an article about governance, and everything you talked about fits under the ESG umbrella. So my next question is, when did your clients start needing ESG services under that label, under that moniker?
Well, we approach this more from the perspective of working with a business owner that's looking to build a more valuable business. And as you can imagine, the elements of ESG all contribute to a healthier business, a better place to work. You know, right now we're seeing a lot of talk in the employee marketplace about healthier workplaces to work and live within. That all goes along with the ESG. And we also see that as that structure and process that can actually help a company become more of a controlled environment, more of a healthy place to work. So I wouldn't say necessarily that our clients came to us looking for ESG, but they come to us looking for building a more valuable business. And the way we look at it is the elements of ESG actually, come right in and help create a more valuable business. And we focus on the G of ESG, the governance.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like this is what you've always done for your clients, is to add value, make sure proper governance is being followed, and build those structures for a more valuable business, which, was ESG before its time, right?
Absolutely. And in fact, my genesis of eventually founding Integrated Growth Advisors was that I was a CPA, practicing CPA, and I was auditing publicly traded companies and working with companies that really needed that governance infrastructure. And at one point, Sarbanes-Oxley came into play, and I was doing a lot of work in the Sarbanes-Oxley world, which, one thing led to another, and here you and I are sitting here today talking about ESG.
So when you're serving clients, do you now present your service offering as ESG advisory services? And if so, how did you form that group? Because it covers so many different elements of a business.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. The way that we approach it is again going back to the core of what we think a private company. Now we focus on private companies at this stage of our existence as a firm. So our clients, being private companies, they're not really in tune with maybe the way your clients are that are serving publicly traded companies that are really governed by the requirement to have some ESG standards in place. But our client base is really looking to have us bring that structure and process and build a more valuable business. So to answer your question, we approach it more from being business growth, business valuation advisors, trying to help a firm become more valuable, help a company become more valuable. And in and of that packaging comes our corporate governance services. So the way that we market that on our website is we just have a menu item for corporate governance services that describes what we do if someone were to engage with us from that perspective. But if they engage with us from a more global perspective of trying to get their business under control, build a more sustainable, transferable business, they're going to ultimately get the corporate governance infrastructure along with the offering they're seeking from us. So we don't go direct with ESG,
right?
But as you and I know, and the discussions we've had, governance is just relevant and it's present in any type of business, right down to a mom and pop grocery store all the way up to a Fortune 500 company.
You're absolutely right. And so in your work, what is emerging as like the most prevalent challenge under the governance pillar that your clients and that you see in your clients and client companies?
We're working with our clients to help them understand that at the core of corporate governance, you need to have clarity at the core. And when I say clarity at the core, and I speak to that with my clients, I'm talking about clarity around roles and responsibilities, clarity around policies and procedures, and clarity around metrics and goals. If we can get our clients focused on those three things, they're at the core of the governance infrastructure. We're on the path to a very good advisory services success experience with our client. Where they fall short in many cases, and I should clarify that we're not working with Fortune 500 companies here. We're working with privately held companies that are, let's say, up to $50 million in revenues on a manufacturing or distribution type company, professional services firms up to $20 million in revenues. Okay. So where we find shortfalls most commonly is the metrics and goals and the roles and responsibilities. So where those two connect, the connectivity between roles and responsibilities and metrics and goals, that's where a business owner or a CEO is going to want to be able to set the compensation for the organization and come up with incentives and rewards for certain productivity elements of the employees. So it's so critical to have clarity at the core with the roles and responsibilities, metrics, and goals, because that's what ends up driving the organization forward. And we can't forget the policies and procedures, but where we see the shortfall most, it's with those two areas, roles and metrics.
And you mentioned that you're working mostly with private companies, and certainly private companies do not have the same regulatory obligations for reporting and disclosures, at least not at this point. We'll see what the SEC does later this month, and maybe I'll ask you that question next. But clearly, private companies are vendors to companies that do require disclosures. So are you seeing for your clients increased pressure from their customers who do have to disclose and report under the UK or the EU regulatory regimes? And that is forcing your smaller private companies to understand and frankly comply with the regulations themselves because they're a vendor to companies that have these requirements.
Yeah, the answer is yes. We're seeing that with product type companies. So the professional services that we work with, they're not necessarily serving public companies. But if we work with, let's say we work with a job shop in the manufacturing sector, supporting a defense contractor. Okay, one of our clients actually does that. They need to be in step with the vendor management policy of their customer. And if their customer is a large defense contractor that's serving the federal government, all of this is going to trickle down to that lowest level. So really, where we get involved, we're not really working on an SEC level that perhaps maybe you guys are. But we get involved where, we help them understand the importance of this. And in many cases, the vendor management procedure that's being followed by their customer is going to make it pretty clear that they've got to comply. But we help them understand how important this is, and we'll work with them to build that infrastructure that they need to. I mean, really, I think at the core of what the regulators are looking for is to have organizations in our system that are stable, and they're all marching in a way that it's a stable, reliable vendor for the companies that are being required to be complied with. So
as a service provider yourself, tell me what Integrated Growth Advisors is seeing from your customers with respect to expectations of your own ESG practices as a firm, Integrated Growth Advisors.
Yeah, I think the way that we interact and we engage with our clients, they're looking for that structure and process. They're looking for that guidance. They're looking for somebody to help them establish those boundaries around what's most important to stabilizing a business and stabilizing a business for growth, because we're integrated growth advisors. So we want our clients to have this foundation that is suitable for their future growth. So when we're engaging with our clients, they're really looking for that kind of that guidance around the structure and process that's important. And again, I go back to the clarity at the core. That's really where we drive at from a tactical perspective. It's clarity around roles and responsibilities, clarity around policies and procedures, clarity around metrics and goals. Along with that, and maybe leading up to that, we'll test the company's mission, vision, and values. If it's already stated and understood, we'll get involved and test what their employees understand about the mission, vision, and values to ensure that it's consistent with what leadership says. And sometimes they don't have any stated mission, vision, or values. So we'll get started initially on establishing the mission, vision, and values, which
Mhm.
eventually will lead to how we interact on those three clarity at the core elements.
So given all the, well, let me step back a little bit, because I was going to ask you about the forthcoming SEC rules. Do you have any expectations about when they're going to be issued and what they're going to include?
Well, from our perspective, we don't really get involved with that. I
Mhm.
think that would be a question for the old Dan McMahon, who was a practicing CPA back in the day, working with SEC companies.
Yes.
So we fall just short of working with SEC companies. But I will say this: the model that we've created, we refer to it as the sphere of governance. That sphere of governance is applicable to public and private companies in terms of envisioning what it looks like, and that's where we might get involved with an SEC company, is to help them envision it, to help them picture it, and help them take that picture and that vision of the sphere of governance, and put it into practice in their own business.
So in your work, what are you seeing that gives you hope in today's bifurcated and complex society? What gives you hope?
It's a really interesting question. I think generationally, I'm from Generation X, and my generation was all about putting our head down, pencils moving, and in many respects following the lead of a command and control type of a governance structure. And I maybe through our generation we started to break free of that type of a leadership style, and started to work more towards collaborative leadership styles. I think what gives me hope is the opportunity for more creativity and the ability to let people's talents shine within an organization, and do it in a way that they're still working within that sphere of governance of the company, but they're able to apply their talents in a highest and best use capability. And that's a little bit different from the infrastructure that I grew up in. Again, command and control. Today, it's maybe a little bit more collaborative.
And are you seeing that in your own incoming recruits of new talent into your firm and the way they want to work, especially given the remote environment that pandemic left us with?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, and the pandemic, in kind of an interesting way for us, opened up a lot of avenues for us, because we've been traveling less. We used to travel and get in front of clients, and now we're able to do it through Zoom. And what we'll do is we'll do periodic offsites with our clients to recalibrate and make sure that they're focused on their goals and objectives. But then we retreat back to our remote locations, and we serve our clients primarily through Zoom and a shared screen sometimes, or sketching out a process and putting it up on the shared screen. So in terms of how the hope that I see and the post-pandemic world that we're working in, I'm looking to attract talented people who have already accomplished a lot in their careers. So we don't really hire recruits out of college at this stage of our growth as a firm. We hire people who are already proven C-level executives that want to continue to add a lot of value to a client, or to the marketplace. Maybe some of them are partially one foot in retirement and spending a little time with us, and we're grateful for that. Other times we'll have somebody that wants to just focus exclusively on building their career in terms of being an advisor to clients after having had a proven track record as a C-level executive.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we're looking to hire the more experienced of people.
Yes.
And that's how we approach it at this stage of our life cycle.
And are you all over the United States?
We are. We serve clients throughout the United States.
Yes.
We've got people situated in the four corners of the United States map and continental United States. And I'm sitting in South Carolina right now, but we work all over the place.
Yes. Okay. One final question in the time we have left. I tell all my podcast guests that I'm going to invite you back in 1 year, and we're going to talk about what has changed. So what will be different for your firm and for your clients when we talk again in a year's time? What are your thoughts?
I appreciate that question. I think for our firm, I'd like to see us doing more corporate governance related advisory services. I mentioned earlier in the podcast that typically the way a client engages with us is because they want to grow, or they want more sales, or they want better infrastructure, which to me is a lot to do with governance. But we rarely have somebody seek us out for corporate governance. So I'd like to see us take on more work that's directly corporate governance related, and maybe working with boards of directors and management teams to help facilitate and navigate the challenges and opportunities that they have. And that's the way I see it for our firm, while we continue to grow our respective advisory service offerings. At the same time, I think that aligns a little bit with what I see with the marketplace. These things seem to trickle down, and 20 years ago, we had Sarbanes-Oxley that was launched. And, for the first couple of years, the professionals, myself included, I was a professional serving large corporations that were implementing Sarbanes-Oxley. A lot of us were figuring it out and applying the COSO methodology and enterprise risk management methodologies to Sarbanes-Oxley to get it figured out. So once that was all implemented in the public companies, you started to see maybe a little bit of a focus in nonprofit organizations, because you had the people that were on the boards of those nonprofit organizations that worked in sophisticated public companies. And then you started to see it trickle down into the private company space. We are in the lower middle market, so we're below, let's say, below 50 million in revenues. So I imagine there's going to be more of an emphasis placed on governance and speaking about it openly and transparently between stakeholders of those organizations and the private companies. So I envision that that's going to take place at some point, maybe in the next year.
I agree with you. I think it absolutely will trickle down because it will become expected behavior, right? And if those smaller companies are in the supply chain of larger companies, then it's going to be, I don't want to say forced, it's going to be expected by their customer base that all of their vendors and suppliers are doing certain governance compliance steps, as well as the E and the S, because they have to report on their supply chain through their required disclosures. So I think you're right. It's definitely going to trickle down. Thank you so much for your time today and your insights. And I think you have a lot to offer. And I think what's going to be happening in the business world, either due to the SEC regulations or the regulations that already exist in the EU and the UK, you and I are going to be busy for a lot of years. Let's hope. Let's hope.
And I appreciate that thought. And it's been my pleasure to join you on this podcast. Especially my pleasure to have met you.
Likewise.
Through our outreach through LinkedIn, which was also a really nice thing. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, it was a great find as far as I'm concerned. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll talk to you again in a year's time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.